The winter snow fell steadily on the small Montana town as Margaret stood on the church steps, watching the townspeople gather for the Christmas social. At 28, she had arrived 3 months ago to teach at the one-room schoolhouse, but her Eastern education and progressive teaching methods had made her an outsider in this close-knit frontier community. Margaret wore her best blue dress, carefully mended where it had torn during the difficult journey west. Her blonde hair was pinned back in a simple style that reflected both her practical nature and limited resources. She had hoped tonight's social gathering might help her feel more accepted in the community, but the whispered conversations and pointed looks suggested otherwise. "Miss Harper thinks she's too good for our ways," she overheard Mrs. Patterson saying to a group of women near the punch table. "All those fancy Eastern ideas about how children should learn, teaching girls arithmetic like they're going to run businesses." Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and frustration. She had come west to make a difference in children's education, but the community seemed determined to view her methods as threatening rather than beneficial. Standing apart from the crowd, she noticed a tall man in a brown coat watching the social gathering with the same sense of detachment she felt. He held the hand of a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, who was studying Margaret with curious eyes. The child broke away from her father and approached Margaret with the fearless directness that only children possess. "Are you the new teacher?" the little girl asked, clutching a worn teddy bear. "I am. My name is Miss Harper. What's yours?" "I'm Lucy. That's my papa, Mr. Jonathan Rivers." Lucy pointed to the man in the brown coat, who was now approaching with a mixture of caution and politeness. "Miss Harper," Jonathan said, tipping his hat respectfully. "I've heard about your work at the school." Margaret tensed, expecting another criticism of her teaching methods. "I hope what you've heard has been accurate. Lucy comes home every day excited about her lessons. She's been practicing her letters and numbers constantly." Margaret felt surprised relief. "Lucy is a bright student. She asks thoughtful questions and isn't afraid to try new approaches to problems." "She is pretty, Papa," Lucy said suddenly, looking up at Margaret with admiring eyes. "And she makes learning fun." Jonathan's expression softened as he looked at his daughter, then at Margaret. "Lucy doesn't give compliments lightly. She's usually quite shy around new people." Margaret knelt down to Lucy's level, touched by the child's acceptance. "Lucy, would you like to see something special?" From her small bag, Margaret pulled out a book of illustrated fairy tales she had brought from Boston. Lucy's eyes widened with wonder as Margaret showed her the colorful pictures and began reading a story about a brave princess who solved problems with cleverness rather than waiting to be rescued. "Can the princess really do all those smart things?" Lucy asked, fascinated. "She can do anything she sets her mind to, just like you can." Jonathan watched this interaction with growing interest. Unlike many of the townspeople, he seemed to appreciate Margaret's approach to encouraging children's curiosity and confidence. "Miss Harper," Jonathan said as Lucy became absorbed in the book, "I should tell you that not everyone in town understands what you're trying to accomplish, but some of us recognize its value. Thank you, Mr. Rivers. It's been challenging to feel welcomed here. Change often makes people uncomfortable, especially when it challenges their assumptions about how things should be done." As the evening progressed, Margaret found herself in conversation with Jonathan, learning that he owned a ranch outside town and had been raising Lucy alone since his wife died in childbirth. Unlike the other townspeople, he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas about education and child development. "You mentioned teaching girls arithmetic," Jonathan said. "Most folks around here think that's unnecessary. I believe all children, regardless of gender, deserve the tools to think critically and solve problems. Lucy has a natural aptitude for mathematics that would be wasted if we limited her education." "I agree. Lucy's mother was one of the smartest people I knew. I want Lucy to have every opportunity to develop her mind." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the refreshment table. Several women were pointing in Margaret's direction and speaking in hushed but clearly disapproving tones. "Some people think education makes women unhappy and unsuitable for family life," Jonathan observed, noting Margaret's discomfort with the attention. "What do you think?" Margaret asked, curious about his perspective. "I think intelligent women make better wives and mothers because they can teach their children to think for themselves." Lucy had been listening to their conversation while looking at the book. Suddenly, she stood up and walked toward the group of women who had been gossiping about Margaret. "Mrs. Patterson," Lucy said in her clear child's voice, "Miss Harper is the best teacher we've ever had. She taught me that girls can be good at numbers, too." The room fell silent as Lucy continued with the honesty that only children possess. "She's pretty and smart and kind. Why are you saying mean things about her?" Margaret felt mortified that Lucy had overheard the adults' conversation, but Jonathan placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Let her speak," he said quietly. "Sometimes children see truth more clearly than adults." Mrs. Patterson looked flustered by Lucy's direct challenge. "Lucy, dear, adults are just discussing grown-up matters. But you were being mean about Miss Harper, and she's wonderful. She makes me want to learn everything." Jonathan stepped forward, supporting his daughter while addressing the group. "Lucy's right. Miss Harper has brought new energy and enthusiasm to our children's education. Perhaps instead of criticizing her methods, we should be grateful that someone with her qualifications chose to come to our community." Over the following weeks, Margaret noticed a gradual shift in how the community treated her. Lucy's innocent, but passionate defense had forced many parents to reconsider their assumptions about the new teacher. More importantly, they began to see the positive changes in their children's attitudes toward learning. Jonathan became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, often arriving early to help with preparations or staying late to discuss Lucy's progress. Margaret found herself looking forward to these conversations, appreciating his respect for her work and his genuine interest in his daughter's education. "Margaret," Jonathan said one afternoon as they watched Lucy practice writing letters, "I want to ask you something." "What's that?" "Would you consider staying in our community permanently, not just as a teacher, but as part of our family?" Margaret felt her heart skip. "Jonathan, are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you'd marry me." "Lucy needs a mother who will encourage her mind as well as her heart, and I need a partner who shares my values about raising strong, educated children." Margaret looked at Lucy, who was watching them with hopeful eyes. "What do you think, Lucy? Would you like me to be your mama as well as your teacher?" "Yes," Lucy exclaimed, running to hug both of them. "Then you'll never have to leave, and I can keep learning everything." 6 months later, Margaret stood in the same church where she had once felt like an outsider, this time wearing a simple white dress as she married Jonathan. Lucy served as their flower girl, proudly carrying a basket of wildflowers and beaming at everyone who would look at her. The community that had once viewed Margaret with suspicion now celebrated her as both an excellent teacher and a valued member of their society. Her innovative teaching methods had produced noticeable improvements in the children's learning, and her marriage to Jonathan had given her the local connections that made her truly belong. "Mrs. Rivers," Lucy said that evening as Margaret tucked her into bed in their new home, "are you happy you came to our town?" "Very happy, sweetheart. Sometimes the most difficult beginnings lead to the most wonderful endings." Margaret had learned that true acceptance comes not from conforming to others' expectations, but from finding people who recognize and value your authentic contributions. Lucy's innocent declaration of her worth had opened hearts and minds in ways that no amount of argument or demonstration could have achieved. The teacher who had come west seeking to make a difference had found not just professional fulfillment, but a family that celebrated both her mind and her heart. If this story of finding acceptance and love through authentic connection touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us how one person's courage to speak truth can change everything. Your support helps us continue sharing stories about the power of seeing and celebrating each other's true worth.